Hello and welcome to the ADHD Skills Lab. This is our research recap episode with the wonderful Will Kerb from Hacking Your ADHD. In each one of these episodes, we will go through a paper, we'll look at some of the practical takeaways, how it's going to affect you with your ADHD, as well as what we liked and what we didn't like about it. So if you've always wondered where some of this research that helps make some of the decisions about your life is coming from, this is what we unpack, this is what we demystify. So come along for the ride. So the paper we're looking at today is about time perception and long-term academic performance, but really importantly, and we'll talk about this more, it's about that in preschoolers. So we want to keep in mind these are 4 to 5 year olds. So what we're looking at here, if we want to just give a little baseline introduction before Will goes into the methodology and how they did this, is that they found that children with ADHD are commonly observed to have learning difficulties. They talk about things like dyscalculia, which I have, so I definitely related to that. And they wanted to look at how 3 neuropsychological constructs, so that's executive dysfunction, delay aversion, and time perception, and we'll talk a little bit about what those are, were associated with ADHD symptoms and academic performance in preschoolers' risk of ADHD. So in terms of how this was done in Hong Kong, and they measured it at different time periods. And what they found was interesting in terms of the relationship between our working memory, our time blindness, and potentially our academic performance. So, yeah. Will, do you want to go into how they did this?
Yeah, well, I mean, and it is very interesting. Like, I think, as we were, just to emphasize what you're saying again, these are 4 to 5 year olds, and we're talking about having lived through having children that were 4 to 5 and knowing their friends, doing that ADHD assessment is very difficult at that age. And so that's the first thing we should really discuss here is this idea of how they are measuring ADHD, which for this case was just a teacher-parent questionnaire that, often would be the first step in a diagnosis for a lot of people. But then that's just the standard. That's where they stop with looking for the diagnosis.
It's symptoms. They found symptoms, not diagnostic ADHD at this point.
Yeah, because it's what's the difference between a 4-year-old with ADHD who can't sit still and a 4-year-old without ADHD who can't sit still? That can be a little bit hard to define because you don't have a lot of the inhibition control and all that things developed yet. So typically we don't see that many children at that age being formally diagnosed, but it is something where you do want to start, with my own children, that's when we were starting to look because we did see noticeable differences in how they were performing, not academically, but socially and all that kind of stuff. And of course, it's every kid's going to be different, and that's why it's important to go beyond just that initial questionnaire being hey, do you have these symptoms?
Exactly.
They were also then they were doing academic performance was based on these standardized early literacy and number tests, obviously Chinese literacy because this was in Hong Kong. So they were using working memory for this executive function side of things. For the delay aversion, they were using a computer game that would, they could choose to destroy the enemy spaceship at one point in time for a score, or wait and have the delay and get 2 points for doing it later.
Should we describe what delay aversion actually is?
Basically, it's kind of like this marshmallow test idea that most people know about, where it's this delayed gratification where you're trying to get the immediate reward versus delayed reward, which is often something that is a huge issue for people with ADHD, where they're just I need that thing right now. I need the dopamine. If I don't have it, I'm not going to do anything.
Which is what they were testing. They also had delay frustration, which was a different task, which I love the title of.
Yeah. Delay frustration. So much fun.
Basically, they introduced a game that children were asked to answer 45 questions compared to the size of 2 animals, choose a small one by pressing a button to indicate their choices. For most of the trials, the next question would appear as soon as the participant responded with a button press. However, in some cases, the presentation of the next question was delayed by some seconds. People weren't informed of the delay. but they were just told the computer was slow. So they were basically given a test of an old computer that doesn't work properly, which, yeah, that would create delay frustration in any age group, I think.
Yeah, I like just listening to the description of that task. I'm just like, I don't
A lot
like
of these
it.
tasks feel like that. I mean, they are testing things that we don't like. And then we get to the time piece, because they also did a time reproduction task and a time discrimination task. And this was really interesting because what they argued was that the introduction of a measure of time was new. This was the newest thing that they were doing. People had done working memory, people had done delay aversion, but they hadn't really separated and looked at time in the same way. And that's what they were doing here.
Yeah, because it was a lot about just how they were able to figure out how long something took. Be like, because the description is the task was presented in game-like format where the child was asked to look at a light bulb appearing on the screen and try to determine how long the light bulb was lit up. Immediately afterwards, the child was asked to reproduce the same duration by turning off and on another light bulb via pushing a button on the keyboard. I would love to see control versus ADHD on this one, because I feel like this is just a very hard
Well, they
task
have done tests of this before, and they have found there is a difference between control versus ADHD in other papers, but I think the difference can sometimes be very small. So you're really talking about small amounts. And in the time discrimination task, they had a similar thing. You've got, they have people here, 3 tones, 2 of them are, 1,200 milliseconds long, and then some of them are different, and people had to identify, they said the odd time in each trial. Some of them were easy, some of them were harder, but again, it's this perception of time. How long are things going to take to you, and how well do you do this? So there is research to indicate that this is the case, but what they were looking at specifically that made their paper different was they were connecting it to academic performance, which was very interesting.
Yeah, and I would love to see that outside of 4-year-olds.
That would be really good.
That would be interesting. I feel like there could be some connection with how long you think something's taking. Like, I know taking tests can be very stressful with ADHD because you have this, that time blindness aspect where you're like, I don't know how long it took me to do this problem. I need to rush through the rest of this test to try and get through everything, because if I can't see a clock, then I don't know how long things are taking, and it feels like I just need to go as fast as I can, and that is going to produce suboptimal results on test.
Exactly. And if you want to see, before we go into the results, if you guys want to see an annotated copy of this entire paper, you can just DM me time at Unconventional Organization on Instagram. Also, just ask questions there as well if you have any follow-up questions, and we can kind of take you through this a little bit more. But essentially where we're at right now is, so preschoolers in Hong Kong, they were not tested, not diagnosed with ADHD, but seen to have ADHD symptoms, and they're tested on their, working memory, their marshmallow test essentially, and their time perception. And then they were also tested on their academic performance in both numbers and in Chinese word reading in a later date to see what the effect was. So, what were the results? What did they find?
I mean, they found that these things all had a predictor on this academic success, but it was the having that executive function piece, that working memory piece, was the strongest indicator of having a link to academic performance, while there was delay aversion and time perception that had a link, but it was not nearly as significant as the executive.
So they found really interesting, they started controlling for families' socioeconomic status, general ability, etc., which makes a lot of sense. And then they found that when those were controlled for, time perception and working memory contributed to children's academic performance at time 1 and time 2, specifically Chinese word reading, which they argued was actually harder, in terms of a working memory than English word reading. They'd done tests on that before, which I thought was really interesting because, again, these tests can be different in different countries. But they were arguing that if you struggle to remember things, if you struggle with time, you're going to have a harder time, based on this paper, with academic performance long term, which is interesting. I think it's sort of obvious, but also interesting to see it here because we don't always think of time perception specifically as a factor in your ability to do things academically. Working memory, yes. Time, less so.
I mean, I actually, sitting and think about it, like, oh yeah, you could be like, I'm bored from reading because I've been doing this forever. Or that, I don't have time to do this. I don't have time to study for these things because I have to go do this other thing. And it's less a direct thing, but more of our perception of things. And I feel like that means that using certain strategies could really mitigate those factors in the long run.
And it was interesting, they also said that it related to other papers and other things that were also done with preschoolers, and a few studies with older children that showed that people who had developmental dyscalculia, which is sort of like math dyslexia, I actually have that, performed more poorly than healthy controls in time processing as well. So there seems to be this connection between time blindness, essentially, which is what we're talking about here, and your ability to do things like basic math or, English or, Chinese letter writing. And it does, I think the biggest thing I had wanted to know, and I don't feel like it was fully described in this. So if you do have any ideas, please let us know, message us and let us know. Why do you think this is? Do you feel like this is a factor for you and why?
Yeah, because I'd love, again, while great as an initial study here, I feel like aging this up to other groups would be more informative for the long run of things. And again, because then we can do some of those mitigating strategies that might, correct for this. And you go, okay, we found this result where this time effect is something that, is significant enough to measure. And then we've tried to do these mitigating factors like using a timer or having practice estimating tasks to see how long they take. And then does that have a good effect on actually making it so that you improve your academic performance simply from the fact that you have done these strategies that are somewhat unrelated?
Exactly. And I feel like ability to do these, I think this is a great paper to get a sense of the struggles. And the next paper is experimentation to find out how to fix them. I will say, though, those papers are sadly much rarer because it's not usually the point. The point is to find the struggles and then, solve it with, one or two things and not necessarily look for specifics. For me personally, this is usually the paper that makes me kind of go out and look for a solution. Like you said, externalizing time. If you use timers, how does that work? What are the other ways you can support time blindness? I think externalizing time is a massive one, like having lots of clocks and lots of, not necessarily timers, but having that visual timer, that red timer where you see time passing. Things like that can be really helpful. A lot of times people feel like they should have alarms on all the time, but that can be very frustrating. And actually, when you look at this paper, it doesn't actually help as much as you think it is, because you can look at a clock or a timer and it can say you've got 25 minutes, and you can look at it again and it can say you have 2 minutes. You're not very good at measuring it. So time timers and things like that do a much better job.
Yeah, I also love when I'm trying to do a task I really don't want to do, but I'm like, okay, this is going to take this amount of time. I look up and I'm like, it's been 10 seconds?
Yes.
I've just spent 3 hours.
Yes, exactly.
How has it been 10 seconds?
I think maybe a little bit of what's the word? Acceptance or acknowledgement that maybe the struggles that you had with time could have affected academic outcomes. I know I always felt like in exams I was rushing. I was like, oh my God, I have no time. I have to go. And then I would rush through the whole thing. And sometimes I would miss the last paper. I regularly got to a point where I had to double check that I hadn't missed, the last page of an exam paper, because I definitely did that. Because I was always rushing because I felt like I didn't have enough time. I wasn't able to measure it accurately and the clocks weren't always very good. So things like that, if that's you, if you've been in that experience, this might be an ADHD that you have experienced, and there might be reasons for that.
Yeah, well, I think that's a great takeaway for us here, that, if you are experiencing some of these things that are maybe outside of the academic area, it might still be affecting that kind of thing, beyond academics, into work performance, where you're like, oh, I only have so much time before I have to do this thing, so I have to just rush in whatever I'm doing and not do as good of a job as I know I could.
And if you need help with any strategies, you can always, DM me. I'm always happy to share. I know Will probably be the same, but because there are strategies out there, and as much as it can be frustrating to see this stuff, even among preschoolers, and be like, it's going to affect academic performance, and be negative. There are strategies out there. It just doesn't often get covered in the academic literature, and that's the piece that's why we talk to you guys and we share this research, so we can also bring some of that strategy. Hello. So you were just listening to a research recap. I'm Skye Waterson of Unconventional Organization. If you like that, there's lots more information about ADHD and support for you at unconventionalorganization.com. You can go ahead and check that out. Lots of free resources, lots of strategies. And if you want to join our programs, you can do that as well. And we'll see you there, Unconventional Organization.